Welcome everyone to this special panel on Truth, Dissent, and the Legacy of Dan Ellsberg, Why Nuclear Weapons Remain an Existential Threat and What Can Be Done About It. I'm Zia Mian. I'm a physicist at Princeton University, where I co-direct the program on science and global security and work especially on nuclear weapons issues. And I've had the great pleasure and good fortune to have known Dan Ellsberg for a long time, and to have learned a great deal from his many insights into nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons issues and what can be done about them. So our special guests on this panel today are Beatrice Finn, who is the Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize-winning campaign coalition that helped lead to the new United Nations Treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. Before this work, Beatrice worked on international nuclear disarmament diplomacy and civil society mobilization with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and the Geneva Center for Security Policy. And our second member of the roundtable panel today is Fred Kaplan, who is well known as the national security columnist for Slate. And he has a long and distinguished career thinking about nuclear weapons issues and defense policy issues. He worked in the House of Representatives for Les Aspin as a defense policy advisor. And for 20 years, Fred Kaplan was a correspondent and bureau chief for the Boston Globe. He's the author of several very important books on nuclear weapons, including The Wizards of Armageddon, looking at the men and the ideas that shaped Cold War thinking about nuclear weapons, and more recently, The Bomb, Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War, that came out in its paperback edition in early 2021. So to set up our conversation, I proposed that we discuss three broad themes with our panelists, building on the work that Dan has done for so many years in so many capacities on nuclear weapons issues. And the first theme is about nuclear weapons issues and politics on the inside and the outside. Dan studied nuclear weapons and then worked inside the government in various capacities on nuclear decision-making with access to some profoundly secret information about nuclear weapons. Fred has reported on and written about the internal politics of US decision-making. And Beatrice has analyzed, organized, and led activism on international nuclear politics in a variety of ways. And so with this first topic, I'm hoping that we can ask the question, what's the difference between what's known and thought about and done on the inside with regard to nuclear weapons decisions, and what is known and understood on the outside, and what differences would it make if more of the information on the inside was made public? How would that change how we think about things? And the second topic we're going to talk about is generational change in nuclear politics. Dan Ellsberg's father worked in the Manhattan Project. Dan is a child of the Cold War in many, many respects and lived through all of it. Fred and Beatrice reflect two subsequent generations of the nuclear age. And so the question here for the three of them to discuss, I hope, is how does generational change play out and shape, and does it matter when it comes to nuclear weapons politics? Do younger people think and feel and act differently about nuclear weapons given the experiences that we've all had? And what does that tell us looking forward? And the third topic, of course, is that given the continuing existential threat from nuclear weapons, what does the future hold with regard to the challenges of nuclear weapons? We have a new administration in the United States, which is going to have to deal with the legacies of the long history of US nuclear weapons policy during and after the Cold War. Many US weapons today are legacy weapons from that Cold War. And what can President Biden and the Congress and the American public do in terms of thinking about and affecting the existing US nuclear politics and policies and arsenals, given the international geopolitical situation and the emergence of the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons and the new global coalitions of states from the global south and civil society that are pushing forward hard and creatively for a world free of nuclear weapons. So what's new that will make the nuclear decades ahead of us different? And then there'll hopefully be time for questions and answers with the audience. So with that, let me hand the floor over to Dan Ellsberg to make a few opening remarks about his insights and experience of thinking about nuclear weapons politics on the inside and the outside, and what was known and what should have been. So Dan, please.
Can you hear me? As I hear your opening remarks in your agenda here, Zia, the very dismaying answer I have to this generational differences is that there is very little generational difference in terms of the actual policy and the threats to humanity. There is an unfortunate difference that in the early 80s, when Fred wrote his astonishing book, The Visions of Armageddon, in 1983, there was an anti-nuclear movement, a very broad one, the freeze movement for no more weapons on either side, freeze on the weapons. That doesn't exist now in terms of a major movement, but the plans haven't changed. When I say that Fred's book was astonishing, it was in light of the extreme secrecy that's accompanied all these plans, and the fact that as a journalist in 83, but also having studied this at MIT, he was able, to a degree I would never have imagined, to have found in his investigations the nature of the discussions, which are very much kept secret, the controversies, the problems, and the plans, 20 years after I'd worked on them. And of course, the bad news was they hadn't changed. That was his method. They were insane when I worked on them, and I'm talking about my products as well as anybody else's. And now he has a new book 40 years later, almost 40 years later, and correct me if I'm wrong, Fred, but the way I read that is, no, they still haven't changed. They've stayed the same. In part, that's because of just very great public interest, ignorance, of what those plans are. And there is a question. Would it make a difference if they really knew fully? If everybody had read Fred's book, Fred's two books, and or if they were aware of the humanitarian conferences that were crucial to Beatrice Finn's monumental work here, for which she earned the Nobel Prize in delegitimizing nuclear war, and still there was no difference, one would have to conclude either that the public was totally indifferent to human future, the future of humanity, or that they had no power, whatever. And we haven't tested either of those because the information isn't out. They haven't read the books in general. I don't know in this country, Beatrice, unfortunately, I don't think they are very aware of the facts that came out in those conferences on which the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons was founded. And so we haven't tested that fully. But let me go back to something I learned in 1961. That's, 60 years ago? Actually, pretty much this month, 60 years ago. My birthday then, I was 30, it was April 7th. My 90th was this April 7th. And it was around that time that I addressed a question to the Joint Chiefs, first in the name of the Secretary of Defense, McNamara, for whom I was consulting. And then it was picked up by the White House, by Robert Comer, who was the deputy to McGeorge Bundy, who was the National Security Assistant to President Kennedy. And the question was simply, if your plans, it was addressed to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if your war plans for now, for 61, were carried out, and they were first strike plans preemptively, not preventive war, but in anticipation of a coming war, they reflected our determination then and still to get in the first strike, to strike second first, and lower damage supposedly to the United States by disarming the Soviet Union to the extent possible. That's always been the basis of our plans, little understood by the American public, and still are. If those were carried out, how many people will die in the Soviet Union and China? Now, in those days, there was no plan reflecting Eisenhower era, for any war with the Soviet Union that did not involve the annihilation of China as well, even though the Sino-Soviet pact had eroded greatly in the late 50s and early 60s and scarcely existed by 61. But even so, China was an inevitable target if we were fighting Soviet troops. And I limited it to Soviet and China, knowing the effects would be much larger than that, because I had the false impression that they had never wanted to know how many people they would kill, that it might leak out, it would not reflect well on their budget requests to know just what we were doing, and that in case that they hadn't calculated that. I was wrong. The question was sent down by the White House in the name of the president to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, how many would be killed. And so, I said I limited to that because I thought that if I said how many altogether, they would just say, well, we haven't calculated all the effects, maybe Albania and everywhere in the world. Give us a little more time. And I thought, no, embarrass them by making them show that they either have not calculated it at all, and they surely must have it for the Soviet Union and China at least, or that their estimates are absurdly low. And in either case, they would be put off balance bureaucratically in view of the new guidance that I had just drafted. By coincidence, I finished drafting it on April 7th, my 30th birthday. And I thought of it then as probably the most significant thing I would ever do. And it, unfortunately, I'm not proud of it now, as I say in my book, Doomsday Machine. Okay, so if we can have the graphic, can we get the graphic up there about their answer, which was in the form of a graph? Can you show that? I hope. I'm not seeing it yet. Yeah, there we go. It was a graph, a linear graph, as you see, very simple model, obviously, starting with the number of fatalities within the first days and week from blast and prompt radiation and fire, and then rising gradually up after 6 months from fallout. And when I ask people what their guess is as to what their answer would be, I've often heard the answer 10 million at first. And I point out that, come on, that's one metropolitan area. That's the Moscow area. How many altogether? Well, 30 million, 40 million. The number here is 275 million people immediately that we were planning to kill in our first operations. And this does not involve Soviet retaliation. It's just what we would do. And it goes up to 325 million, another in 6 months in radiation. Now, there were two things about this. First, I looked at that, and the reason I wanted it up here is to say, I'm not going to keep it up the whole time, but look at it. It's a plan for killing 275, and actually for killing 325 million people in the Soviet Union and China alone. And since fallout does not respect national boundaries, that was clearly an underestimate for the whole thing. I saw that as an evil plan, the most evil plan that had ever existed. There was no capability for it before 1945, or really in the mid-50s with H-bombs, or even 61. But this was 61, and here was a plan for killing 275 million people, done by people that I knew, that I had drank beer with in the evening, socialized with, colonels in the Pentagon who worked on war plans and who carried out this plan. Well, the second thing was, okay, they know this. They do have a calculation, simple as it may be. How many will be killed altogether? So Comer sent that question down in the name of the president. And the answer came back again very quickly, without embarrassment, without delay. And this was not in the form of a graph, it was a table for who would be killed in various places. And it added up to about 100 million more in East Europe, where airfields in the satellite character, what we call the captive nations, are covert, what to call them, we sympathize with very much, with our Hungarian and our German and our Romanian populations and Polish. 100 million were going to be killed by our attacks. Not on cities in this case, because in the Soviet Union and China, every city was targeted. Every city over 100,000 and many below that as part of the plan and a first strike plan. But in this case, the cities wouldn't be targeted per se, but airfields, air defense positions, communications, command sites would all be targeted, and military targets of various kinds. So 100 million would be killed there. Another 100 million in West Europe, our NATO allies, would be killed by fallout depending on the wind, which depended on the time of year that this took place, but possibly then 100 million from fallout from our own attacks without any strikes, any warheads landing on that area. And finally, in areas contiguous to the Soviet Union and China, like Afghanistan or Austria or Finland and northern Japan, northern India, another 100 million. That's 3 additional 100 millions. A total of about 600 million. 100 holocausts from our first strike. And finally, and by the way, the capability for doing this absolutely persists today, and plans, we have hundreds of plans for little strikes that supposedly might not escalate. Fat chance. But the capability is still in play, and still the killing, the burning of hundreds of cities, whether or not they're targeted per se. So what we've learned since that period, and I'll come to an end with this, just to set the term, that was true in 1961. It's true today. That was essentially our only plan then. Now we have other plans. But we've come to realize, or some have come to realize in the last 35 years, that burning the cities, even by attacks near the cities, or ones that accidentally go near burn the cities, will cause firestorms that will put smoke in the stratosphere, that will cut out 70% of the Earth's sunlight to the Earth, and cause around the globe a nuclear winter, freezing rivers and lakes, but more importantly, killing all harvests and sentencing nearly all the population of of the world, to death by starvation within a year.
So Dan, with that, let me, if I can, pass this on to Fred and to Beatrice to share with us how they see the impact that information could have had if Dan had made it public at that time. And I mean, Fred, do you have, in your own sense of interviewing and looking at the documents, that policymakers in the more recent generation since then that you've talked to for your most recent book, do they have a sensibility about this kind of destruction embedded in the nuclear war plans? And Beatrice, the humanitarian initiative and the process that ICANN has done so much to lead, that led to the ban treaty, has built itself around this sense of the need for people to understand the destruction that nuclear war involves. How much of a difference do you think these kinds of numbers actually make to the public perception of how to think about nuclear weapons? So Fred first, and then Beatrice.
Well, first, thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be speaking at this event, celebrating my old friend Dan Ellsberg and his legacy in American and even international life. I think it's an interesting question. I think that if you, well, first of all, one thing that Dan said is absolutely true. There was about a 30-year period from, let's say, the end of the Cold War until Trump's presidency, where nobody thought much about nuclear weapons at all. We were on sort of a holiday from history, which I enjoyed, by the way. And it wasn't even thought of much. Even before then, this was a field, it's very technical, it's very specialized, it was sort of left to the experts. Not a lot of people thought about it. I think the people who were in the community, the Wizards of Armageddon, as I call them, these notions had become so ingrained and so theoretical that I don't think they thought much about the real life consequences. And now, well, I tell you, up until about 1970, the assumption was that if there was going to be a war between, say, the United States and the Soviet Union, it would be a nuclear war. In the last few decades, we've developed more in the way of conventional weapons, a conventional defense. It's conceivable now that if a war did break out, it might stop before it went nuclear. This was an idea that would have been dismissed as foolishness when Dan first started out in this trade. And so people could evade the nuclear question in that way. But something else happened, and if I could indulge you, I'd like to just lay out about a 5-minute version of a history that goes a little bit beyond what Dan was saying. The thing to remember is that when Dan first came along, say late 50s, early 60s, the war plan was that if the Soviet Union, say, invaded, tried to capture West Berlin or invaded West Germany, the plan, there was no plan B, this was it, was to unleash all of our nuclear weapons at every target in the Soviet Union, China, and Eastern Europe with the results that Dan laid out. We didn't really have much in the way of conventional defense for this sort of thing. And when people such as Secretary McNamara tried to build a conventional defense, there were generals, and as Dan said, quite intelligent generals whose view was, well, no, if we suggest to the Russians for 1 minute that we might not respond to their aggression with nuclear weapons, that will degrade our deterrence, and maybe they will attack. By telling them, no, we're going to blow you to smithereens, that will deter them. Now, there was a school of thought, and Dan was among the people who thought about these things. There was a group of analysts at the RAND Corporation who, first of all, thought this was incredibly immoral. They didn't have the numbers that Dan learned in 1961, but they did know that this would kill lots of people. But there was also a question of credibility, because around 1960, 61, the Soviets started to build their own long-range weapons. Not as many as some intelligence agencies thought, but they were building them. And so the idea was, well, if they take Berlin, and then we respond by clobbering them with nuclear weapons, they're going to clobber us with nuclear weapons. Or maybe by knowing that fact, maybe we really won't clobber them with nuclear weapons because we'll know that they could clobber us, and therefore the deterrent is weakened. So they came up with this idea, both to make the war plan less immoral and to make it more credible, to have limited nuclear options. Like maybe the first thing we'll do is to knock out just their strategic rocket forces. And then if they keep coming at West Germany, then we attack maybe just the military targets, not the civilians. And Dan was instrumental. This document that he said he was no longer very proud of, it laid out, it was called I forget exactly what it was called, but it laid out a new war plan that divided our options into 5 different options, starting with limited attacks and leading up. Well, one thing that I learned only when I researched my recent book, because that war plan, the revised war plan, when I wrote Wizards, nothing was declassified about it at all. The only information I got were from people in the Pentagon, like Dan and several others, who helped write it. What I didn't know until recently, and I think what Dan didn't know until recently, was that the generals at the Strategic Air Command in Omaha didn't take this revised war plan seriously. They would insert in the guidance phrases like, to the extent possible, we will do this, or to the degree that it conforms to military goals, we will do this. And then they determined that it wasn't feasible, and it didn't conform to military goals. And so for many years after that, when a lot of people thought we had these very delicate, limited options, the plan remained blow everything to smithereens. It really wasn't until the 80s, the 1980s, almost at the end of the Cold War, that some people took a look at this and said, this is just insane. And by the way, I'll just tell one story to the degree to it, how crazy the overkill was. For example, there was an anti-ballistic missile site outside Moscow, near Sheremetyevo Airport, that had, it was believed to be, we found out after the Cold War that it couldn't shoot down anything. Something like 80 nuclear weapons were aimed just at this one site. There was an air base near the North Pole. It couldn't even be used for 2/3 of the year. It was so cold. And it wasn't even a primary air base. It was an air base that Russian bombers would land on after they'd bombed America. 17 nuclear weapons were aimed at this air site. There was a plan, one of the directives was we should destroy the Soviet tank army. And there were nuclear weapons aimed not only at the tank armies, but also at the factories that built the tanks, at the other factories that built spare parts for the tanks, at the mines where the material it just was like everything. And this infected the entire war plan, and there was no way to make it any smaller. And so there was a group of civilians, ironically, working with the authorization of Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, who went in and just ordered a complete overhaul of the war plan, looked at every target, and they were able to cut the number of nuclear weapons, required nuclear weapons, in half, from 12,000 to 6,000 at the time, without any nuclear arms control. That was just paring it down, just taking all of their assumptions into account, everything that they believed about what you needed to destroy, how much you needed to destroy, how the nuclear war would go, and et cetera. They cut the number of weapons by half. Cut a little bit into the future. Barack Obama's team conducts a very highly classified review of the nuclear war plan. Same thing. The New START treaty had just been signed. This cut the number of nuclear weapons, which had continuing to be cut, but down to about 1,500. It was really like 2,000, but the way that they were counted in the treaty was 1,500. And they went through with the head of Strategic Command, looking at every target, everything. Is it possible to aim just one weapon at this target instead of two at this target instead of three, et cetera? And they came to the conclusion that, yeah, we could get this down to 1,000 with no harm to national security, except the Joint Chiefs said, well, we will endorse doing this only if the Russians match us. It wasn't, they did not argue against the notion that we could do this, even unilaterally, with no effect to our national security. But for political reasons, they wanted it to be bilateral. And Obama, who wanted to have a follow-on to New START, he also didn't see much point in unilateral reductions. He thought it would take away some of our bargaining leverage in getting the Russians to reduce their own weapons. Why should we reduce some if they're not going to reduce any? And again, these discussions were absent any larger, more basic discussion of even assuming all of the premises again that, well, there are certain circumstances where we might have to respond with nuclear weapons, or at least we should say so, otherwise we might be tested. Nobody ever asked, well, how many do we really need, and how many do we need to do what? You asked, would there be some rising up of the citizenry if they knew what was going on? I don't know. I think, though, when you talk to people who know just a little bit about nuclear weapons, and you ask them, well, what's this all about? What do you think this is for? Most people would say, well, I guess it's that if they attack us, we attack them. MAD, mutual assured destruction. But in fact, as Dan said, that's never really been what our policy is about. Almost all of these weapons are and always have been aimed at military targets. Now, they're big enough that a lot of people get killed anyway, but it's a military war plan aimed at military targets for the purpose of achieving some kind of victory in a war. That's
So,
what
Fred, with that, let me ask Beatrice, who spent decades trying to engage people, both citizens around the world, as well as officials from non-nuclear weapon states, on these kinds of conversations. And let me ask the question, if all of this information that Dan had in 1961 and that Fred mentioned about the war planning and so many warheads aimed at some empty airfield in the Arctic, how much of that kind of information ever surfaces in the broader public debate? And when it is brought out, as Dan has done, as Fred has done, how do civil society organizations find that it does political work in the world?
Yeah, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor to be here, and really nice to get the chance to talk to Dan as well. I think, to be honest, like, you know, what I experience is that most people don't like nuclear weapons. There's very few people like, yay, I love nuclear weapons, I want more of them. And people think that they are dangerous. They might not know too much about it, but everyone knows the mushroom clouds, and everyone knows that it's really bad. And I think that that's a thing that most other weapons don't have. I mean, most people don't know what a cluster bomb is, so most people don't even know barely know what a landmine is. But, you know, nuclear weapons, people still are aware that it's a mushroom cloud. But in my experience, I think that the main problem is that they don't think that they can do anything about it. This issue has very intentionally been, hidden in secrecy, of course. And we created these structures, and the structures around nuclear weapons have intentionally kept this information very anonymous. They use very sanitized language. I mean, like in a country like the UK, for example, they don't even say nuclear weapons. They won't even acknowledge in their language that it's a nuclear weapon. They talk about our nuclear deterrent. They call it. It deters others' nuclear weapons. And you have this kind of way of talking about nuclear weapons that just makes it sound really rational and sane when it's really completely irrational and completely insane. You have all these confusing acronyms talking about all different missiles, different numbers, and very technical. I think, in particularly since the huge kind of public movements at the end of the Cold War, kind of after the Cold War ended, they moved on to other things. What was left was really the experts who have this kind of sanitized version, and that I think that Fred also talked about, like, you know, this professional view and talking about it. And I think in addition to that, it's also this very strong kind of masculine way of looking at this issue, right? Like, you know, nuclear weapons, they're tough and they're strong and it's very rational, and this is very, you know, giving up nuclear weapons will be very naive, very emotional, very weak, very feminine. Even diplomacy is weak, and you know, the person with the most weapons win, when there's very little evidence that actually works in reality. So I think that you know, those kind of structures and the way that we talk, the way the politicians talk, the way that, you know, media talks about nuclear weapons, it makes it really hard for people to have confidence in that they could ever do anything about it. When we talk about nuclear weapons, we focus very much on the leaders of the nuclear arms states. It's Kim Jong-un, it's Trump, or, you know, it was Trump, Putin. You know, we need to get the US and Russia to negotiate. And a person sitting like in their home, like, that has nothing to do with me. How could I do anything about that? And I think it really hides the fact that this problem is so much broader than the 9, you know, right now men of the leading the nuclear armed states, and it involves so many more actors. It involves weapons companies, it involves the whole kind of government structures, the whole military, the banks and companies that build these weapons, the laboratories, the think tanks that are promoting deterrence. It's like a whole structure of actors. And here, for example, being a non-American, I mean, the European countries, the non-nuclear armed states in Europe are completely complicit in this. You have countries like Germany or Netherlands or Italy. There are more nuclear weapons in Italy than in North Korea. And we don't think about that as an issue. Like, the big threat is North Korea, and that's the problem that we talk about. But we don't think about our own governments and our own kind of complicity and how we uphold those structures. And I think that's also, in a way, we've always seen nuclear weapons as such a, like, it's different than other issues we care about, different than the problem of racism, different than problem of human rights violations. Like, it's some kind of it's completely separate, boxed-in issue that doesn't touch upon any of those other things. So, in my opinion, sort of the way that we challenge that is through being very transparent with the information. I do think that going public with the information about the targets, about the impact is really, really important, because I find that politicians have very little response to that. There is no preparedness to deal with the mass humanitarian consequences, the mass deaths, the enormous sort of suffering that would happen if nuclear weapons were used, even one. This is what the three conferences and the humanitarian conferences were about, to really conclude that there was no government, group of government, or international organizations that could address this effectively. There will be no help coming. And what they've also succeeded with, this kind of the sort of people in power that made this decision, is to also make it seem like it's never going to happen. I saw a paper in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists just the other month, where a professor from Stanford concluded that a child born today is more likely to see nuclear weapons used than not. And to just let that, just to think about that, like, kids born today, according to this, is more likely to see nuclear weapons being used than not. It's shocking, right? And the politicians that are supporting this, and the countries that are supporting this, and the companies that produce these weapons, they have no plans, no capacity to handle this. It's extremely naive, extremely irresponsible to continue that kind of policies. So I really do think that we need to talk about this. I don't think it's about just increasing the number of people that will die and think that is what's going to trigger people. I've seen, even from our side, we have these studies. We can put out numbers about how many people are going to die, how much of the nuclear famine, the nuclear winter will cause mass starvation around the world. Billions of people might starve to death. But I think it's really the personal stories that makes people act. When we move away from talking about structures and kind of hypothetical scenario, to listen to a survivor talking about how her 4-year-old nephew looked like in his final hours before he died. How he was crying and she wished that he would die sooner because he was in so much pain. Or how a woman from the Pacific Islands, for example, where nuclear weapons were tested, talk about giving birth to stillborn babies as a consequence of the radiation they've been exposed to. Or how people in Kazakhstan have been die of cancer. I mean, those kind of stories are what really makes us empathize with this and makes us realize that this security that the people in power are talking about isn't security for normal people. It's just death and destruction and devastation, and there's nothing they will do to prevent that. So I think that's really how we get people to think about this issue and to really understand that this is reality. This is not science fiction. This is actual weapons and actual people like you and I sitting at these positions, making these decisions. Nuclear weapons is not a natural state. People make intentional decisions to keep them and to have them and maintain them and develop them and modernize them. And we can make different decisions.
Let me go back then, if I can, to Dan. And Dan, have you circled back to this question about, as Fred mentioned, that things have changed in the sense that within at least the US decision-making on these kinds of things, there is some imagination. It might be just imagination that the possibility of war, stopping short of nuclear war, even when both sides have nuclear weapons, is something that, at least some people think is a prospect. And where you see the future going with this kind of sensibility, because an argument could be made that the generation that created Cold War institutions and ways of thinking had to invent solutions, technologies, postures, and plans based on whatever they could put together at that time. And as time has passed, Has there been learning? Fred would suggest perhaps not as much as some people might want to see, but that there has been some adjustment even on the inside to the kind of overkill that was built into those early capabilities. And the question becomes then, where do we see the prospects of this process unfolding? How much further down this path of incremental change can we actually go before you reach the irreducible questions about having to get rid of all nuclear weapons, which is where ICANN and others, have already pushed back from, to the point where, they can't imagine a possibility of, even keeping a few weapons in a few places as an acceptable outcome. So Dan, do you want to start with that and see what you see as the future holding and what the coming decades will be that will be different?
I don't see any significant incremental or decremental change in the dangers of nuclear war over the last 60 years or 70 years. There's been an enormous change in the number of warheads, 85% or more, less in the US and China, which I would say, given their continued deployment and dependence in their plans on vulnerable ICBMs, would tempt anyone pleased either with a false warning, a tactical warning of the kind we've had a number of times, or an armed conflict that raises the prospect of escalation shortly, will put in the minds that these ICBMs have to be off the ground before they're destroyed. We have to get some use out of them, use them or lose them. So there is no tendency whatever, despite a handful of people in Congress who've raised, like Ro Khanna and Ed Markey and others, who've talked about getting rid of ICBMs, very rightly, with almost no support. There's almost no prospect at this moment that I'm told politically, I hate to say, although it's what I'm working on, no prospect of succeeding in eliminating this hair trigger of what I earlier was describing and what we're all describing really as a doomsday machine. As Beatrice points out, whether it's an actual doomsday or near extinction, it's not extinction, but near extinction is not the key thing. But it is a massacre of vast proportions, almost hard to imagine, and which, by the way, the public is not really very conscious. Would they change if they were conscious of it? Let me go back to Fred's point. I learned from Fred and others, everything I see in the paper and everything else, that there has been essentially no change in the imagination of these people. If we compare things to PSYOP 62, the Eisenhower plan, which was a single plan for hitting every city, in any armed conflict, yes, that has in principle changed. But I can't take pride in the fact that Fred talks in each of his books, and actually each new generation of planners on this goes back to PSYOP 63, the one I worked on, very proud, the Ellsberg, Rand, William Kaufman, Brody, everything else, which was, Fred makes the point, we didn't realize, which was never implemented at all in any significant way, but which second, I think I make the point, I'm not sure whether, but had it been implemented, would have resulted in a nuclear winter anyway. It wouldn't have made any difference. And even if it didn't have that, which we've known for 35 years, would have been killing scores, hundreds of millions of people. I just came across the other day a reminder that when Theresa May was first Prime Minister in England, she encouraged the first question in the first session of Congress, Parliament that she was on. She wanted to be asked, in order to embarrass Jeremy Corbyn of Labour Party, who would have given a different answer, she wanted to be asked, and was asked by a Scottish National Labour person, Prime Minister, would you be willing to launch a nuclear strike that would kill hundreds of thousands of innocent people? And she wanted to be asked that so she could say right away a one-word answer, yes. To be embarrassed. Corbyn would say no. But his own Labour Party, of course, impressed on him that no, the answer to that was yes. But not many people commented on the fact hundreds of thousands, that's not relevant to nuclear era that we're talking about. We killed 100,000 people in one night in Tokyo. FDR did, March 3rd and 4th, 100,000 people. That's Cold War. Hundreds of millions is what we're talking about. That's a factor of 1,000. And when I say hundreds of millions, referring, say, to the 600 million that I talked about in 61, that's only the beginning. That doesn't take into account nuclear winter or most fire, most of the fallout, or Soviet retaliation. So you are talking, even in 61, not less than 1 billion people, which was then 1/3 of the population. Now we have 7.8 billion. It would be about 7 billion. It's not hundreds of thousands. One Trident submarine, and I would say, which is what they have at sea at all times, the British, I would say one Trident submarine could and probably would, if used, kill hundreds of millions of people. I repeat, that's 1,000 times more than they're looking at. Now, in terms of, Fred makes the very good point that these weapons have been designed to have a winnable war, or at least a prevailable war, a war in which we win, one in which we limit damage by our coercive effects. That's something I pressed at the time, keeping targets under threat, and trying to get the other side not to escalate the war further. Or Will Coughlin's emphasis and the Air Force emphasis, destroying their ICBMs by getting in first and so on, all with the effect of limiting damage and getting an acceptable outcome. Now, Fred does mention from time to time, that this is a rabbit hole, a crazy world. But the simple fact is that the idea of limiting damage in a war that goes beyond a handful of nuclear strikes in the Soviet Union, I should say Russia now, or China, or for that matter, India and Pakistan right now, is the idea of limiting damage is totally a hoax, a fraud, a delusion. It is as much a delusion as limiting damage by anti-ballistic missiles in a large war. And everybody knows that. It's kind of widely accepted. No, you can't really do that, hitting them in the air and lowering damage sufficiently. But hitting them on the ground by hitting first, isn't that different? You do destroy some weapons. No, it isn't any difference. It's as much of a hoax as ABM. So why does it go on? Well, in answer to your question, Zia, I think the main answer is not simply that people don't understand how catastrophic this war would be under any circumstances. They have a sense of it. As Beatrice says, they know it would be a bad thing. But basically, we are looking at not only apathy and ignorance and a sense, as Beatrice says, pretty well-founded sense. We as individuals, or even as a group, don't seem to have the power to change this. And that's no foolish, defeatist attitude. Actually, we've seen very little evidence that we, the people, do have the power to change it. The evidence isn't there. What we've been doing has clearly failed. And there have been movements, and there is a movement of which Beatrice is a major leader at this very moment. And what hers represents is very good, something new. It's a new approach. We have to have new thinking and new approaches, and the one, like me, the ICANN, the TPNW, is a new approach. But we haven't yet seen the evidence that it will change any defense budget or lower it or get rid of ICBMs or do anything else. We have to keep at it. Why then? What's the problem? Why no change? Is it just that the public doesn't care? The public is up against very powerful interests, corporations and interests that have a very strong profit interest in the status quo, exactly as it is. The Boeing, Raytheon in our country, General Dynamics, make Lockheed make a lot of money. over preparing for this war, even though what they're preparing for, a damage-limiting preemptive first strike with highly accurate, fast weapons, both submarine and air, is totally infeasible in its aims. But that doesn't mean it's not profitable, and it doesn't mean that they don't have money to buy Congress with and jobs in almost every state and district in the Union to build these things, like the ground-based strategic deterrent, so-called, and the other weapons. Lobbying, in and out arrangements with the Army, like Austin, and the military in general. In other words, Eisenhower was right. There is what then unprecedented combination of a huge standing forces and a huge armaments industry. And that he said it should be kept from having undue influence. We have to be wary of that. Well, that was 1961. That is our 60 years ago, right? 1961. Okay. That's not a threat. We've been living with that now for the last 60 years. It's no less strong, no less important than it was before. As E.P. Thompson put it, to paraphrase him, we don't have a military-industrial complex. We are a military-industrial complex as a leading part of our economy and our political and our politics. And that's what we're up against. Does that make
Again, let me use that as a transition.
I'm just saying, Gia, I think we have to recognize that and name the people, name the corporations for the first time. They don't get named. Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics and Raytheon. As political influences, arms makers should have no influence on our foreign policy. That's just a position I put forth, but they have enormous influence, and we have to deal with that. Can we? We have not yet found out how, but we've hardly tried. So, as I say, every new approach, and we'll have to think and explore, how do we challenge the influence and power of the institutions that have an enormous stake in keeping things just as they are. And just as they are is we're on the Titanic in a dark night, heading into iceberg waters at full speed. And it's not certain that we will hit the iceberg in the next 70 years any more than the last 70, but it's damned likely, very likely, unless we find some new way to change course and turn this ship around.
So,
I would like to
please
raise,
go ahead. Do you want to pick up on that?
I would like to raise to assert one small sign of hope. Okay, there's a big budget debate going on now, and the military, or certain branches of the military, are pushing for the modernization of the complete nuclear triad: a new land-based ICBM, new submarines, a new bomber, new cruise missiles. They say that all these things are becoming obsolete. And the estimated cost for this over the next 25, 30 years is $1.3 trillion. Now, at the same time, the United States has just spent a couple of $1 trillion on COVID relief. Biden has this plan to spend $3 trillion more on various social and economic programs. The military itself, outside of nuclear weapons, is hammering for, they keep pushing up the China threat. And so we need more ships, conventional, just regular warships, conventional submarines, more airplanes. And there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill who are not part of the usual community that decides these things and that accepts the dogma about the triad and so forth, who are thinking, this is starting to cost a lot of money. We don't have enough money to pay for all of this stuff. And there are some people, and I've talked with a few of them, even on the armed services committees, which used to march lockstep with the military, saying, do we really need a new ICBM? Do we really need new bombers? Do we really need a new cruise? Submarines are something else. Submarines are undetectable. They're invulnerable. They're going to start wearing out. I don't think there's anybody against building new submarines carrying nuclear missiles. But the ICBMs, You can see this. Northrop hammered to get a multi-billion-dollar contract for a new missile before Trump left office. They are ramping up a huge lobbying campaign for this. It shows that they know that they're in trouble. They know that they're in danger. The funny thing about ICBMs, it used to be that the thing about ICBMs, they were fast, they were powerful, they were accurate, they were the only things that could destroy Soviet ICBMs in their silos. Well, for many years now, the Trident II missile, whether you're for this or not, they have the power and accuracy to hit nuclear missile sites. The new rationale for having any ICBMs at all, it's kind of insane. And I'm not sure who invented this, but it's called, and this is true, I'm not making this up, they call it the nuclear sponge theory. We need to have the ICBMs, because if we got rid of ICBMs, there would only be about 6 targets in the United States that the Soviet Union would have to hit in a first strike. And they might be tempted to actually do that. Now, sure, the submarines would still be out there, and the bombers, many of them would have gone off the runways. But we need those 400 ICBMs to soak up the attack, because that's a big attack. It's a major attack. It's so big that the Soviets won't do it because they know that we would retaliate. Well, my argument to that is, well, this is very different from 10 years ago when the same guys were saying that they would launch an attack on 1,000 missiles without even thinking about it. But let's say that theory is true. Let's accept it. Do you really need 400 sponges? Wouldn't 40 be enough? If they had to launch 80 warheads against 40 missiles in the United States, killing millions of people by collateral damage, they think that that the American president wouldn't respond to that? So, I mean, it's time. And I think the certain elements of the Congress are waiting for and are perhaps persuadable by going back to old questions, old debates, which haven't been in the public domain for decades, on how much do we really need to do what? How much is enough? Even assuming that we need nuclear weapons at all to deter this and that, and by the way, that's a position that I don't think is going away anytime soon. Do we really need all this stuff? Do we need any new stuff? Isn't the stuff that we have now just fine, and can't we reduce those numbers by quite a lot?
So, given the turn that Dan has mentioned and Fred has talked about in terms of the material political economy base that makes a nuclear weapons complex actually possible, since nuclear weapons, unlike ideas, don't just emerge in the minds of individuals. They require enormous investments in facilities, institutions, sites, people, technologies. And so part of the work that ICANN has been doing, I'm going to ask Beatrice to explain this, is to challenge not just the moral and security consequences of having nuclear weapons, but also the political economy base that sustains nuclear weapons complexes in the nuclear armed state. So Beatrice, what is the way in which you and others have tried to take on this material political economy base that Dan sees as such an important new challenge for us to confront, and that Fred now sees in play in the struggle over ICBMs and sustaining the modernization in this new financial situation that the United States in particular finds itself in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the, as the ever sort of optimist, I see that the multitude of actors involved in upholding the structures around nuclear weapons is a huge opportunity, because there's just more people we can impact, right? There's more people we can start pushing and changing their minds and bothering and like poking and disturbing. And I think in particularly, you can feel like that, like, for example, we've had 4 years with Trump, and for someone, I'm Swedish living in Switzerland, there's nothing I can do about Trump. Trump is going to, there's nothing I can do about the US president's, opinions about these things. But there are things that I can do to kind of approach other parts of the structures that uphold nuclear weapons. And I think that, and like I explained earlier, like the countries, allies to the nuclear armed states, countries that host other countries, other nuclear weapon states on their on their territory, or countries that collaborate and will be part of using weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations in times of warfare. They are one part of that we can work with. But also the financial system, the companies that produce these weapons, to kind of push them really on that. But also start with the companies or the financial institutions that lend them money, work on divestment, work on kind of highlighting that we should not be, my money on my Swiss bank account here, my salary, my pension fund should not go to financing weapons of mass destruction that's going to kill us all eventually. So I want that out. I want to make it difficult for the producers. I want to make it difficult for the people who continue to do this, to really kind of start disturbing them. Universities, for example, almost every nuclear weapon in the United States was developed with the University of California. There's a huge amount of universities, over 50 American universities that are involved in producing, maintaining, and sort of developing nuclear weapons. That's something where, for example, physicists shouldn't be a part of that. Physicists today, for example, shouldn't feel like they want to go into this work and build weapons of mass destruction. They should use their expertise for other things. Students should protest, for example. So I think that there's a lot more opportunities, and I think that also that we've seen now with this huge pandemic crisis and economic crisis that comes from that, how bizarre it becomes, right? Like that we're spending so much money on a weapon that we can't even use, pretty much. That is extremely inept to solve the security challenges that people are actually facing today. What happened when the huge crisis came? It wasn't our ICBMs, for example, that saved us. It was nurses, it was grocery workers, it was delivery people. And I think that kind of like pushing that change in how we look at security and what it is that protects us, I think is really, really important. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit on the sort of the question about, you know, what have we achieved is possible to change. I think it's very easy to be extremely negative in this issue and to see like almost as long as we have some nuclear weapons, we all failed and nothing has been done. An enormous amount of work has been done. I mean, we've developed things like the Geneva Conventions, for example, that actually regulates that no, Theresa May can't kill 100,000 of civilians. She can't. She will be a war criminal. You're not allowed to target civilians in warfare. We banned bioweapons. We banned chemical weapons, we banned landmines, we banned cluster munitions. Things that people said was impossible, would never happen. We've reduced the nuclear arsenal with over 80%. We've pretty much stopped nuclear testing, with only North Korea as an exception. We've ensured that it wasn't, as was predicted, that 35, 40 states would develop nuclear weapons. It's only 9. Out of over almost 200 governments in the world, only 9 actually have nuclear weapons. And we haven't had nuclear war since 1945, which is also a huge win and not something that would be taken for granted. And none of those things would have happened if people just shrugged their shoulders and said, oh, we can't do anything about it. And people have fought these things and demanded those things. And I'm not saying that all of these things happen for one reason. I don't think that any solution in the world happens today just because of one event or one campaign or one initiative. Like, it's a multitude of things. And I really do think that without people's involvement in this issue, we probably would have seen a lot more nuclear armed states. We might have seen nuclear use by now, and a whole different world, really. So I do think that just as the fact that there's still sexual violence against women in the world doesn't mean that the feminist movement have lost, right? And it's hopeless and then nothing is never going to happen. Or just because there's still human rights violation doesn't mean that the human rights conventions, for example, were useless and should have never been done. I think we have to look at this as work in process. And for really, like, for 75 years, it's been legal for some states to have nuclear weapons, right? It's been acceptable for some states. So the most powerful have had this kind of rule where we're exempt from the rules of others. We are allowed to have this weapon. And in January this year, that changed. Like, nuclear weapons became illegal under international law. So it's not going to happen over time. Like, these kind of processes take, you know, enormous amount of time. We can't see it in the moment, right? Like, you have to zoom out and look over 50, 60, 70 years. But 75 years of almost brainwashing of the world that this is normal, this is rational. And right now we're kind of having to start to unpack that and undo a lot of that brainwashing. And I obviously think that it's definitely possible. And I think that the treaty will be a huge part in changing mindsets. I think there will be other things, of course, as well, that could help. You know, the fact that the nature of conflict is changing. I mean, nuclear weapons are incredibly useless. I mean, they're clumsy, they spread radioactive material. I mean, Russia destabilized the United States during the election with some Facebook accounts. I mean, the nature of how countries operate towards each other is changing enormously also with technology. This kind of 1940s technology might be completely irrelevant. So I think that we have to work on all these different fronts, right, to kind of change the mindsets and make change possible, really.
So let me just follow up from that. So recently, the Admiral Charles Richard, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, gave testimony in the U.S. Congress and then did a press briefing, which, for those of you interested in the current state of one aspect of U.S. nuclear thinking, it's incredibly enlightening to read his own words, where on the one hand, you see claims about how Strategic Command is a war-fighting command. Right? So much for nuclear deterrence, that they are a war-fighting command. And yet they say in the next paragraph that all our plans assume strategic deterrence will hold. In other words, we will never have to fight nuclear war, but we are a war-fighting command. And this gets to what, the contradictions that Dan and Fred were mentioning earlier. But one of the things that I want to pick up on what Beatrice said about brainwashing is that Admiral Richard, in his testimony to Congress, said that U.S. Strategic Command, and this is because this event for Dan is being hosted by a university, and it matters here that these are the institutions which are used to produce people with shared ways of thinking, who then move through society and careers for the rest of their lives, carrying some of those ideas. So Admiral Richard said that U.S. Strategic Command, and I quote verbatim, works closely with world-class universities and education systems through our academic alliance, a partnership of over 60 institutions. The command advocates to incorporate deterrence history and theory, allied perspectives, the importance of treaties and alliances, an understanding of capabilities, delivery systems, weapons into curriculums. The aim is to enhance understanding of our mission and the importance of strategic deterrence. In other words, the military is now partnering with universities to bring their way of thinking about nuclear weapons directly into the classrooms of the next generation. This is a necessary part of sustaining the next generation of people who will think nuclear weapons are somehow okay, that nuclear deterrence is sensible, rational, practical, moral, prudential, that it's okay to have a career in this field, right? The careers often pay well, but there are other factors that people take into account. And so, as Beatrice mentioned about universities, and it may only be a matter of time until this extends into schools, but this idea of the military reaching out into classrooms, specifically and publicly in alliance with universities, to actually enhance understanding of our mission and the importance of strategic deterrence. In other words, this is the kind of intervention in curriculums that one would imagine in authoritarian military garrison states. And this comes back to Dan's original point. It may well be that, as E.P. Thompson said, this is actually the nuclear garrison state reproducing itself in this way. And so, Dan, let me come back to this question then in our last go-round, since we're going to be closing up at 2:30. Thinking back on the importance of dissent, right? Where are the opportunities for dissent in this kind of structure that we're seeing being reproduced now for the next generation, where the Cold War is attempting to rebuild itself with regard to the next 70 years of nuclear weapons, young people committed to this project, and the material political economy base of nuclear weapons for the 21st century? Where is the space for dissent that you would see?
I've often heard from people close to Congress and others that there is no way of moving Congress or perhaps even the public and the president away from the present policies other than costs to our citizens, to taxes, to budgets, to debt, or if it's a case of war, American casualties. That's the only way one could look at it, the cost. And as Fred said, the argument is being made right now in Congress. ICMs and other things are unnecessary. They are waste. We have other uses for the money, supposedly. If we do have the other uses, no question. There should be conversion and so forth. I am skeptical. Yes, these are being made. I am skeptical that this argument will be more effective in the future than it has been in the past, because actually, as Fred points out, the enormous bulk of these weapons have never been necessary for what Americans think of as the legitimate purpose of nuclear weapons, which is deterring a nuclear attack on us or possibly on our allies. They've never been for that, never necessary for it, never for it. And wasteful? Well, the money goes to ourselves. Is it wasteful to have aerospace workers in Seattle and Silicon Valley and Georgia and everywhere else? Is that wasteful? No, it's a jobs program that is an acceptable jobs program that you can get through Republicans and always has been. So when Beatrice mentions, and I was quite startled, she said 400 universities, did I understand that? Are somehow involved in that? I live in California. What did you say?
50.
Oh, 50. Okay, 50. Oh, only 50. Well, that makes me feel better, because I used to think it was one in my own state, the University of California, which has two campuses entitled Los Alamos and Livermore, which have designed and produced all of our nuclear warheads. I was part of a long-term project going to the regents and everybody else questioning the appropriateness of a university designing nuclear weapons. That had no effect, actually, any of the others. When you mention, though, the 50 or 10 or 50, whatever, it reminds me that, first of all, the notion of a military-industrial complex, which was in Eisenhower's speech in 1961, in its first drafts, talked about a military-industrial congressional Congress complex for his first several drafts, and that was dropped when people noticed that he was going to deliver that before a joint session of Congress, and they might be offended by being included in that Congress, which obviously they very much are. It's the so-called iron triangle of Congress and the Pentagon and the arms industry. But my friend Ray McGovern various people have extended that in various ways. I think he talks about Mickey Mac, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, something else, academic, what? Media, media, that's right, the other M, there very much so. Media, academic, think tank complex, Mickey Mac. Well, that's pretty good if you include fossil fuels and banks in the industrial part. Is there a possibility of confronting these other than saying, we don't need to give you money to give to our workers and our congressmen and others? It's unnecessary. We can do it in other ways. That's one approach. Is there possibly another approach? I know what moved me, as I said in my earlier talk here in the keynote speech, was when I came to see that the Vietnam War was not only had no prospect of success. It was not only unpromising, costly, wasteful, and so forth. But when I looked at the beginning of it, realized that it was illegitimate, that it was an act against the independence of a former French colony that had declared itself independence, and we were part in the next 30 years of attempting to deny independence and self-determination to a country on the plausible grounds that a communist-led movement would not give them democracy. That was true. But ignoring that there was an aspect of independence in there, of foreign control, and that we were foreigners. Very hard for Americans to see themselves as foreigners anywhere, as in Afghanistan. We're helpers, we're brothers, we're supporters, we're friends of democracy. We're not invaders, which they mistakenly, as we see it, see us as. Actually, we don't even perceive that they do it. Here's what the dimension I think that had moved me. When I came to see that it was depraved indifference, murder, that it was murder, like Chauvin's murder of George Floyd, but on a scale not of a thousand, but of millions. And we're talking about the prospect here of hundreds of millions and billions. That meant to me that I had to do more than simply object to it, that I had to really try to expose it at the risk of my career or my freedom and resist it non-violently. I was influenced by King and Gandhi and Barbara Deming and Thoreau and others on that. And I have not been disillusioned about that approach since. As I look back 50 years of my education on that, I'm disillusioned by a lot of things, including to some extent the American public as well as Congress. I see it as more shortcomings than I did then, I think. It wasn't just the problem of the executive, but and we've seen that in the last few years especially. But the question of what one should do about it, seeing it as a moral issue, here's how I see it. Abraham Lincoln caused a civil war, really, caused secession, by saying before he was president the following: if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. He didn't say it's the worst thing there ever was, it's absolutely the worst imaginable thing. He just said it is wrong, in a sense that divides wrong not just from right, but from not wrong in that degree. Something you cannot extend, is what he was saying. Okay, I say that having a doomsday machine in any form, and let me even put aside the other 7 states, which are many doomsday machines, but many. Let me look at Russia and the U.S. Their processes, are not just their arsenals on a hair trigger, above all, 2 hair triggers, are not just wasteful and infeasible of achieving their aims, which they are, and unnecessary. They're wrong. The possession and the existence of an ability to kill hundreds of millions or billions of people, which has existed since 1950 in the United States, when we had 1,000 operational A-bombs, which would have been targeted at cities and would have caused nuclear winter. Or 61, when I looked at it, when they knew that it was 600 million just with H-bombs and thermonuclear. The possession of that, the existence of that, is deeply, deeply wrong. And morally wrong, evil, wicked, and must be opposed and denounced and resisted, even at great cost to oneself. Not one American official, let's just say above my grade, which was GS-18, but Deputy Assistant Secretary, not one in that 60 years has taken a public stance that this process of which, in many cases, they would say, I was part at my level, is wrong, terribly wrong, and should not exist. And I will do everything I can to resist it. Not one, without violence, without even risking prison. Yes, I risk prison, but that's not the essence of it. They haven't risked their job, either of Vietnam or Iraq or any of these other things, or nuclear war. And the other nations that have said for a long time, it's a crime against humanity to threaten first use of nuclear weapons, which it obviously is. And to possess, it's a crime against humanity to possess this doomsday machine or anything like it. Not one of those nations has paid a price, unless possibly New Zealand to some extent, to really say, this is outrageous, You are threatening our existence and the existence of most countries in the world. This is condemnable. It is not acceptable. Does that mean they absolutely turn away all relations with the United States? Almost surely not. We're too rich, we're too important, we're too powerful to break off everything. But they should not refrain from saying simply, this is absolutely unacceptable. And I think there is some problem. I'll end with this. I think there's a great problem in convincing the people. They should be convinced, but they won't be convinced in, let's say, Israel or North Korea or India, Pakistan, which have enormously more weapons than they can possibly justify if we're open. That's true of India, Pakistan, all the others. It's true even of London and Paris with their 100 or so or a couple hundred weapons. But to convince them that it is morally, that they should unilaterally, whatever, give those up altogether, that there is no purpose for them. That's arguable. I think I would try to persuade them, but be very difficult. Should it be equally difficult to tell Russia and China, I'll put them in, but they're much less. They're 1/10 of the U.S. and Russia. Should it be that to convince Russia and the U.S. that this is wrong, absolutely wrong? Will that be sufficient to say that? Is there a way of making them? I don't know, and I don't know a way. But I suggest that that is worth raising. That is a truth that is worth putting out, that it's wrong. And remember, the Confederacy did not agree with Lincoln. They didn't agree it was wrong. They were doing something wrong, but it was necessary. No, it was right. Morality, that was their morality. Morality can be the problem. The notion that it is acceptable to be loyal to the president above all other loyalties, like McNamara and everybody else, before that, to put that above their oath to the Constitution, above the humanity, that's the morality of officials, and not only of officials. I suggest we change that. We make demands of ourselves that we haven't, which is to make demands of our representatives that they have to take into account the insanity and the criminality of what we in the U.S. are doing, and indeed what Russia's been doing, and that reflects on the others as well. But that has not been a part of the discussion of this in the last 70 years.
So thanks, Dan. So we have a few minutes left, and so let me hand it over to Fred and then the last word to Beatrice to come back to this question about the scope for dissent. I mean, Dan has rooted the dissent in this moral judgment about the absolute wrongness of nuclear weapons. And so I'm just wondering, Fred, I mean, from where you sit and having reported on this for so long, both and thought about it in the case of the United States and in Moscow for so many years during the Cold War, do you see that this kind of moral intervention that Dan advocates for, there's a way in which that would gain leverage on the kind of people who are actually in office or aspire to office in the kinds of situations that we see in the institutions that make policy in weapon states?
I think there was a better chance for this a decade or so ago than now. I mean, I think to change anything in what Dan is talking about, I think there needs to be quite a substantial transformation in international politics. The tensions between the United States and Russia, between the United States and China, between India and Pakistan, between Israel and the Shia states in the Middle East, the fact that North Korea has nothing going for it at all except for the leverage that they might gain from a nuclear arsenal. The fact that even now, every time the United States, a president talks about the possibility of a no first use policy, as Obama did briefly, many of our allies go berserk. Does this mean that you're not extending the nuclear umbrella over us? Which, by the way, if they did believe that, this might promote nuclear proliferation. Japan, if it was explicitly pointed out that no, we're not going to use nuclear weapons to defend you, there would be a lot of incentive and impulse for them to build their own nuclear weapons, which they're quite capable of doing. So my regret is to say that, at least given the way that the world politics are right now, the inability of both sides of whatever potential conflict you're talking about, have the ability to even talk about this sort of thing, much less mutually wind it down, it is so small that the preconditions for what Dan is talking about, I think, just aren't there. Which listen, it's not to say that it's always going to be like this, and it's good to have these arguments and the cases at hand when the opportunity does avail itself. So I don't minimize the value, the worth, even the necessity of talking about this, and also occasionally, and I welcome an opportunity like this, because I'm in a world where, I'm talking all the time about things that are practical. It is sometimes a good idea to elevate oneself, and I do use the word elevate consciously, into thinking what is really the sensible thing to do, the right thing to do, even if it can't be done now, to use that as the context, as the new agenda for when the world does open up to make it possible again.
Thank you. So Beatrice, the last word. As somebody who's actually trying to change the geopolitical climate within which these 9 nuclear armed states and their officials and their populations think about these things, how do you see the process of encouraging dissent in these states?
Yeah, I've been thinking so much this year of watching the sort of Black Lives Matter campaign and how the anti-racism conversation has just sort of escalated this huge, challenging a structure and a system that was built by powerful people to protect, and how that is kind of being exposed as a very abusive, oppressive system that actually hurts and harms and kills people. And it wasn't actually because of one murder, right? Like this has been a civil rights movement in the United States that have been going on for many, many decades. It's been mobilized for many things. Like it doesn't happen accidentally, these things. It is the result of a lot of different things coming together in a moment, right? But also, like, what we do know is that without the activism and people taking action and doing the mobilizing, doing the education, talking, losing, then something happens, and you have a platform to take advantage of those moments. So a lot of the work that we do is really to build, right? Like I think also if you compare to the climate change movement, it's also a huge existential threat. We know we're all going to die from climate change if we don't do anything. People don't act because it's so hard when you don't feel it. And the climate change movement really became, leveled up in a way and became much more kind of in the face of politicians when people started feeling it. Like here in Europe, there were fires. In California, it's burning. We're running out of water in places. You can feel it, that it's getting hotter, and that's when people act. Unfortunately, with nuclear weapons, it's not. When we talk about watching it on camera or feeling it, it's too late, right? And it's not one murder, it's not one fire, right? It's end of the world kind of scenarios. So what we really have to do is just build that dissent. I agree very much with Dan, said that how necessary it is to make that personal sacrifice as well, and to really take that responsibility yourself to denounce this. And each one matters. It's so easy, right? To get, even I feel like that. I sit in these NATO headquarters meeting with all these NATO governments, and I feel really like, I shouldn't be making this noise, right? It's really hard to stand up for these things when you're feeling the pressure from other people. So every single person that dissent makes it easier for the next person to do that too. And that's how we kind of build. And the fact is that over 120 governments got together and said, this is unacceptable. this is not just unacceptable, it's also illegal. It's illegal to threat like this. It's illegal to develop these weapons. And that's huge. So really, I think that, we need to continue. Like, we have a moral obligation to just continue. We don't know when it's going to be fixed, but we know that it's not going to be fixed unless we do it.
So thank you all. It's been a great privilege and an honor to be part of this panel. And so with that, we're out of time. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Beatrice. And as you've all said, it's important to show up and speak up on this issue as on so many other things. So thank you all.
To all of you, hear, hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.